Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1976 film The Food of the Gods, and it's a giant critter film, which is why I chose this, because this review is for The Rose Bride, who is a subscriber to my channel and a very awesome person, has left a ton of really cool, interesting comments, and has recommended a lot of films to me. This was one we went back and forth about very recently, me not having seen it before, so I was like, oh, I'll pick this one because A, it was recent, and B, I like giant critter films. I think they're interesting. And I think she said either this was a pick of hers for either Best So Bad It's Good or Most WTF for one of the years, for not one of the years, 76. So I went with this one. So The Rose Bride, I hope you enjoyed this review. Written and directed by Bert I. Gordon, who also did Attack of the Puppet People, The Spider, Picture Mommy Dead, Empire of the Ants, which I've heard about, Satan's Princess, and Secrets of a Psychopath. Those all sound interesting. Based on a portion of a novel by H.G. Wells. It even says in the beginning of the film, based on a novel by H.G. Wells. Don't think you really needed that, to be honest. It's just like, there were so many movies that came out like over the decades at this point that were just like giant critters, so do we need that source material? I don't know. One of the rat costumes was actually apparently reused for the Star Wars Holiday Special. People love the Star Wars Holiday Special. That's a joke, obviously. Well, actually, some people do because of like the so bad it's good aspect. But Ray Harryhausen supposedly was interested in making this film initially. Makes me wonder what it would have been like. I assume it would have had a bunch of stop motion animation, and that would have been super, super cool if they did a bunch of that. Would have been better than what they ended up doing, because let's be honest, all the footage of like the real rats, not great. Not great footage, especially when they're, animal cruelty alert, when they're shooting what looks like red paint at these critters. I know they weren't actually I was going to say they weren't actually hurting them. They weren't actually killing them, I will say. They were probably actually hurting them, because it looked to be a high enough velocity that what they were sending at them was actually causing pain, causing issues. So definite animal cruelty. That sucks, but this was also a thing back then that people weren't all that cognizant of, didn't really talk about much. The freeze frames in the beginning during the football game looks terrible. It is awful while the credits are going. This is obviously Morgan and his buddies playing, so it gives you the backstory on who Morgan is. But why does this matter? Why is he a football player? Was it meant to be in there because he's athletic and he's strong and he'll be able to take these things on? I assume that's the angle they were going for with this. But at any rate, you're showing us him playing football. You're establishing this. Why do we need to keep freeze framing on just him playing football? It seems ridiculous. It's very horribly done, especially because the audio keeps going while it's freeze framed, which makes it even weirder. Just bad choices. There were a bunch of weird bad choices in this film, but it is so on the nose when Morgan gives his father's quote about nature getting even and then says it came true that day. Just to let, I felt like just let it play out. You know what I mean? This is one of those moments of show people, don't tell people. But they had this stupid narration voiceover with Morgan, which he gives the quote from his father. He could have just given the quote and then stopped there. But then he was like, oh, it would come true that day. And it's let us experience the film and understand this, And then he even does it at the end of the film where he comes back in and he has this whole wrap up, which I think I'll comment later on in my notes. But it's it's one of those things show, do not tell. You're treating the audience like they're stupid. I think if you just drop that quote from his father and then just let things play out, people are easily going to get what's going on here. They're going to tie it back. We will understand. And then I realized why Morgan looks so familiar. I got excited because I'm like, this dude looks familiar to me. So his name is Marjoe Gortner. I was like, why does he look so familiar? Look him up on IMDb, and he played the husband in one of my favorite So Bad It's Good films, Mausoleum. I think I actually named it as my favorite as my number one So Bad It's Good film for the entire 80s. Mausoleum. Oh my goodness. So I got excited about that. Also, the woman who plays Miss Skinner is Ida Lupino. She was Mrs. Preston in the film The Devil's Rain, which I talked about in one of my, I forget which year that one came out, one of my 70s Superlatives videos. That is a crazy movie as well. So, like, to see those two together in this and be like, wow, those are both, like, nutso films that I actually really adore in interesting ways, it was cool. It was just cool for me. So, yeah, that's who they are. The giant mosquitoes don't look that bad, but the camera work won't really let you focus on them. I understand that you want to kind of get, like, the feeling of someone struggling, someone trying to fight these mosquitoes off. Like, that's fine, but to the degree they were going with the shakiness and also, like, the quick cuts and getting, like, really close in and not, like, showing you enough of the mosquitoes, they didn't look that bad. You know what did look bad, though, is when the mosquitoes are like flying and they just look like silhouettes, basically. That's when they did look bad, but they wanted to spend plenty of time focusing on that, not enough time focusing on the practical mosquitoes, which looked a lot better. So again, choices. I certainly didn't see the giant rooster head coming. That was pretty wild. It was a nice surprise for me. I actually think it looked pretty cool. I like the fight between Morgan and this giant rooster head. That was cool. But one of the things that really let me down with this film is that they then, like, kind of abandon all these different large animals. I think it would have been cool if they would have kept going with it, but they just get to the rats eventually, and they're just like, okay, so now it's just all about the rats. It's just about them fighting this horde of rats. And it's like, I wanted to see more. Like, I wanted more creativity. I wanted more cool giant creatures. I don't know about everyone else. You can let me know in the comments. It doesn't take... I don't know. Just thinking about this film just makes me laugh from time to time. My wife was around when she was watching. She went to sleep. She did not see much of it, but I would, like, tap her and wake her up for certain things. Like, look at these rats. Like, look at this. I got excited. It's definitely a film that you should watch with people, so you can kind of laugh about it. It doesn't take long to understand the title, as Mrs. Skinner says the food causing the gigantism is a gift from the Lord. So yes, this gets turned into, it's the food of the gods. They are delivering it to people, but actually, as the film ends up basically saying throughout, is the food is being delivered for the creatures to eat it so they can get larger, kill people, and rid the planet of this horrible human plague because humans are trashing up the planet. That's the main message here, obviously, but they go very hard at it, obviously. It's still fun, though. I like how Morgan and his buddy come to the conclusion that their friend's death was just because he ran out of luck. And that speaks to one of the big things in this film is no characters really react appropriately to the situation. Everyone's just like, it seems like they just accept, oh, there's these giant critters. Like, this is just a thing. Let's just see what we can do now. Like, they're way too calm. They don't react enough to the craziness. And they should be panicking a lot more, especially a character like, I'm blanking on her name, Lorna. Lorna was the worst of the worst, and, like, the acting wasn't the best with her. Her character was probably the most egregious with, like, not really reacting to things, and she really seemed like a character that didn't matter at all, except for the moment where she, you know, uses the gun, the shotgun to shoot the one rat whose head, like, pops through the front door when they're holed up in the cabin. But she was a pretty terrible character. Mrs. Skinner can't move her hand when the giant caterpillars are eating it. I don't understand that. When she goes in, I guess it was like her pantry, and then she starts screaming because all these giant caterpillars are, like, eating her because she's covered in blood, and she just keeps her hand there. I'm like, they don't weigh that much. I guarantee they don't weigh that much, especially because you see later that she's put them in the sink. They're dead, and she put them in the sink. I guess it's like a shock moment, but it goes on for a long time where she's just, like, not doing anything about the fact that, like, she's losing blood to these things. The giant rat attack on Mr. Skinner is fun when he's, you know, dealing with his car issues. It did remind me a lot of Night of Lepus, the way it was shot. Actually, there were a decent amount of things here that reminded me of Night of Lepus. I'll talk about one more of those things in a little bit, but definitely tied into that. But like I said, there were a lot of, like, giant critter films, so it wasn't, you know, just Night of Lepus. It's just That's the one I think of most when I think like giant critter films. I think that one's fun. With how the pool of bubbling food looks, the food of the gods, I wonder if Larry Cohen ended up taking some sort of inspiration from that for when he made the stuff, because it looked very similar. Like, it looked like the stuff, it was bubbling like the stuff when it's found, like, it just made me think to the stuff. So this is a film that kind of, like, made me think to other films. Mausoleum, The Devil's Reign, Night of the Lepus, The Stuff. So, hey, it brought up some great film memories for me. The scene of Jack swinging a shovel at the wasps is pretty funny to watch. I did get some good laughs out of that one. Then when Morgan shows up and he shoots all of them, and they basically turn into like these black clouds of smoke, that's weird. And this goes back to what I was saying about, you know, them not looking good. They just look like silhouettes. And then they get shot and it's like this puff of smoke. I'm like, what is this? Like, it's such a weird thing. And that makes me need to pause for horror hydration. When you're parched, nothing better than some horror-derived H2O. Pretty easy to tell that Morgan and Lorna will somewhat get together based on the way she looks at him when he first kills the wasps. It was a really, like, focused, like, her being like, Wasn't she supposed to be with Jack, though? I mean, it's pretty obvious that, like, she's with him, but she doesn't really like him. She gets into fights with him and stuff, but, like, I don't know. Those characters were weird. Their dynamic was also weird. You don't really understand, like, why they're together. Yeah, and you understand why Jack is there, because he's trying to make this deal to get this food, probably for nefarious reasons, as, you know, it's talked about, but, why is she there? Like, I don't get it. It's weird. It's very weird. Turning the giant wasp's nest into a bomb was fun. I did really like that moment of the film. And the wasp nest looked good. It's like I was saying, like, the giant critter effects, when it's not like the real critters, when it's like the constructed practical effects, they look pretty good. I liked them. Even those rat heads. Those rat heads actually look pretty solid. I can see why one of them was potentially repurposed for the Star Wars Holiday Special. But the bomb creation out of the wasp nest was a lot of fun. That was cool. Pretty dangerous, but cool. Once the rat tunnel ended up being introduced, I just knew that someone was going to, have to stay down there and kind of traverse it. And that's when you start seeing the rats actually being shot. And that's when you see that actual footage of them being, like, hit with what looked like red paint, as I said. And at that point, I was kind of like, this is not the greatest to watch for that reason, because I am sensitive to, cruelty to animals, basically. But I stuck it out for the purpose of doing this review. I understand it doesn't hit everyone the same way, especially for a film like this where you're like, this was literally so many decades ago and things have changed, thankfully, in film, so people would not be doing this type of stuff. The rats being sprayed with the red paint is effective, I will admit, because it kind of really does look like they're really being shot, and their reactions, as they try and, like, they're stunned or they start to try and run. Don't think it was necessary, though. They didn't need to do that. They made the choice to do that. It was effective for what they were going for within the film, but they could have done it in a much different way, or I don't even think they really needed to show that. They could also have shown it on the larger practical effects pieces that they made, or even smaller ones, whatever. The entire sequence with the rats showing up at Rita and Tom's bus doesn't do a good job of making them actually seem dangerous, especially because they shoot it kind of like slow motion. They look docile in the first place. Excuse me. They look docile in the first place. Then when they're in slow motion, they look even more docile. And then they're just kind of like, like slowly, playfully kind of just like crawling on the bus, and like, they put the right music to it to try and, like, make it seem dangerous and everything like that, but it doesn't do a great job. You're watching it and you're just like, I am not fearing these critters. I want to pet them. They look very cute. And the rats looked extremely cute throughout the film. The electrified fence idea is ripped off from Night of the Lepus. Yeah, when they electrify that fence and then they run into it and they run away. Very much taken from Night of the Lepus, I will say. So that made me think to it again. Everyone had to know that Jack would end up getting it at some point because he was the immoral businessman. And as we know in all horror films, well, not all, but almost all, the immoral businessman gets it in one way or another. To make a reference, just like in The Stuff. Since I'm already thinking about it. In the end, they got to eat that stuff. You eating it, or is it eating you? It looked really goofy when the rat head flung the door open. That was the one moment where Lorna was actually looking like she was somewhat useful when she shoots it. But, like, it was so quick. It was a surprise. It was cool that they kind of did that. It was a little bit of a jump scare, so that was kind of cool, but it didn't look too great. Because it was just like, boop, and it's just like real quick flash and then gone. And you're just like, oh, okay. It's a little something. I did find it funny when Rita said, I used to think a lot about death. Then she explains how she just lay in bed thinking about dying. I'm like, what is this dialogue right now? Like, the dialogue wasn't that bad throughout the film, but then, like, this piece of dialogue, I'm like, what? She's talking about, like, how she would, like, ruminate about dying so much. I'm just like, okay, it's kind of odd. The fire on the fuse of that pipe bomb. You know, Morgan makes these pipe bombs because this is how he wants to start dealing with things, going after the rats. So he lights the fuse to this first pipe bomb while he's, like, in the kitchen after he's constructed it. And they walk it through the house, get it to the front door. By the time they get it to the front door, it was pretty close to the top of the actual pipe. So much so that then when they show them going outside, it definitely had enough time that it would have exploded in Tom's hand. Let's get the real version of this film, where Tom's hand gets blown off. Potentially worse. Potentially his whole body. I don't know. Like, however strong it was. It had to be really strong, because he used, like 2 or 3 of them to take out that dam. The fire on... Oh, I literally just read that. My apologies. Good thing Mrs. Skinner expressed how she wasn't afraid of dying right before she ends up being eaten by rats. She, you know, like I said, the characters didn't seem to, like, react appropriately to a lot of stuff that was going on. She was very blasé about things. I think she kind of fit into this situation of, like, just whatever happens is what the Lord wants, basically. Because that's how she was speaking about the food. And then just being like, oh, well, it just makes things large. Like, that's intended. That's how things are supposed to be. So it makes sense that she was very kind of like go with the flow about dying. She's be like, well, this is my time. But it was just kind of funny because she's like, I'm not afraid of dying. And then literally like a minute or so later, it's like, chomp, chomp, chomp. You're getting eaten by rats. So good thing you didn't care. The water running when the dam explodes looked horrid. You couldn't even necessarily identify it as water. It did not look like running water. It looked like just like some sort of white something like superimposed over the film. It was very odd, very bad looking. I do love the shots of the rats crawling over the cabin and chewing it. That was funny, but once again, they don't really look menacing. I'm assuming they did something like smear peanut butter on it where they were actually trying to bite it, but well, maybe not, because rats are normally destructive anyway. They will just kind of chew things. They can actually even chew through concrete. I don't know if anyone knew that or not. Unfortunately, sorry, gotta pause again. A little horror hydration. Letting it sink into you that rats can chew through concrete. It's pretty scary, actually. It's well known that rats can swim. So how is this flood killing them? That's what I didn't understand. First, when I saw them, they're like, they're going to blow this dam. I'm like, okay, well, rats can swim, so, like, what's the purpose? I don't understand what the purpose of this. And then it gets even worse because you get the idea that a bunch of these rats actually did drown. Because they shoot it that way. Like, they go that direction with them. But I'm just like, it is well known by, like, everyone that rats swim. They can swim. And while they're filming it, and, you know, you see the rats in the water, you're seeing them just swimming. They're doing just fine. So it's just like, yeah, it's weird. You just gotta throw your hands up. It's okay. Lorna dumping the jar of food on the dead rat pile was like, look, I did something. Like, that was her being like, I know I've been pretty useless throughout this film, but I'm gonna take this one jar and just, like, dump it right here, and then they light up the rat pile. She's pretty worthless. I already talked about talked about this. She's a pretty worthless character, for the most part. I mean, she was kind of just there to, like, be interested in Morgan, and then he becomes interested in her, which, you know, like there was a time with films, especially during this time, where they kind of felt like they always needed that. They would always have to have a woman and a man come together through the events of the film. It's just like, or start out that way and makes them stronger by the end. I don't know. Morgan's voice over at the end says what people already get about the film. Totally unnecessary. He basically wraps up what we just saw. We don't need it. Once again, like the voiceover narration in the beginning, we don't need it. It's treating the audience like they're dumb. Oh man, the sequel should be Giant Elementary School Kids. Which apparently there is a sequel. I found it somewhere. Like I saw online that there is a sequel to this. Might have to check that out at some point. Might even be worse than this, I would guess, actually, because the budget was probably lower. So the practical effects would probably be worse. But anyway, I want to see that sequel where it's Giant Elementary School Kids. Because that's how they set it up at the end. Let's see these giant elementary school kids throwing tantrums and destroying buildings. I'm down for it. That's cool. That's a new wrinkle. I don't think we've seen that before. Oh, and just so you know, I had a hard time finding this anywhere to watch. So I ended up renting it on Vudu. It was only like $4, so totally worth it. Totally worth it. People don't seem to react appropriately to these giant critters. Lorna especially is very blasé about everything. I know I already said this, but I'm going to point out again, Lorna in particular is very calm and whatever about every situation. She probably should have been the person who was freaking out the most in this film, though, because she doesn't know much of what's going on. Like, she's just brought in by Jack, and she's just a person who just, like, wanders into this. Like, you understand why Jack isn't that surprised. You understand why Mrs. Skinner isn't, because they've already been there. You understand when Morgan and his buddy come back later, why they're not that surprised, because they already dealt with it to a degree and didn't care that their friend died. So it's like... But Lorna, I don't know, she's a terrible character. But yeah, once again, gonna say, I did like the practical effects. They're kind of cool. This is definitely one of those, like, so bad it's good films. Watch it with a friend, have a good time with it. So I'm going to rate it 2 ways. As an actual film, out of 5 stars, it's like a 1.5 star film. It's not a horrible film. Like I said, there are some good things about it. As a so bad it's good film, I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. I'd hit it at the 3.5 star mark. I was between 3 and 3.5, but I'm going to go 3.5 on this one. So hopefully this review was enjoyed by the Rose Bride, well, and everyone else who watches it. You can put your comments down here about your thoughts about the film. I'm sure Rose will do just that. I'm looking forward to it. I want to hear her thoughts on more about the film, but also her thoughts on this review. But leave a comment. Do me a favor. I'm getting tired. Do me a favor. Hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I really do appreciate it, and it is quick, painless. Costs you nothing, so it's a really easy thing you can do for me. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing at least 4 a week at this point, which I think is a good amount. But at any rate, I do thank you very much for watching this particular video, and until next time, keep it brutal.